get underway. So yes, my name is Simon Tyrrell, and I work for Opus IVS, and I work for the BMW team. So I'd like to welcome you all to this latest BMW webinar. I am actually doing this in the confines of my front room due to the lockdown. So family have been warned not to disturb, but they hopefully they won't sort of run across the camera and start pulling silly faces. So, yes, a little bit about myself. Yes, Simon Tyrrell. I've been a BMW technician. Well, I've been working with BMWs now since 2001. Been with Opus Autologic since the beginning of 2016. And today we put together a little bit about sort of batteries and diagnosis of batteries and a few symptoms that you may come across when cars have been sat immobilized for a little while. So hopefully you'll pick something new up. There is going to be some basic things in there, so apologies to the guys that maybe know a little bit more. But we are getting an increased amount of cases come through in relation to batteries going flat, EWS tampering faults, other symptoms that's sort of going around that. So we're going to try and cover some of those off today. Chat is turned on, so like my colleague Nicola did mention in the chat, so if you do have any questions, I will try my very best to answer them at the end, or she can even WhatsApp me, got my phone here as well, some questions, and I'll try and answer them maybe as we go. I've also been a request from some of our overseas customers to speak a little bit more slowly. I will try my very best to speak slowly. Unfortunately, I do have a habit of speaking quite quickly, but hopefully I will be clear enough so you can understand. So, COVID-19, yes, a little bit of an awkward situation worldwide. Currently, my car's been sat on the drive now for weeks, barely being used, working from home, and we are actually seeing an increased amount of calls in relation to sort of flat batteries, where some people may be getting into their cars again, and certain issues have arisen. So I'm sure you know most of the symptoms all to do with flat batteries. A customer may contact you, say that their ignition's not coming on, it's very slow to crank. They also may say that their car did start, but there's a few other things that aren't working anymore. So we're going to go cover a few things over the next few slides. Now you'll have to forgive the basicness for this slide, but we're talking about maybe if you're having to describe to a customer where to jumpstart their car from if they've got their own equipment. But we do need to do it from the jump points under the battery, under the bonnet. If a car has battery management systems, it has an IBS sensor connected to the negative terminal. If you put the jumpstart terminal, jumpstart clamps or the battery charger clamps directly across that, you will actually damage the electrics inside the IBS sensor and cause some further issues. So ideally, advise anybody to jump start the car from the jump start terminals. That's where you connect your battery charger. And customer may say to you, yeah, I've jump started my car, I've driven my car, but certain things aren't working anymore. So we're looking at maybe things like heated rear window, maybe not necessarily in the current climate, heater fans only on one speed, but most commonly the stop-start function is going to be an op. Now, that is pretty much down to the low battery state of charge. Now, we know these modern cars with power management systems, they look very closely, or the engine ECU will look very closely at the percentage of the state of charge. And as it starts to reduce, certain things get switched off. So stop start is the first one to go. That has to be sort of about 70 to 76% charged for the stop start to work. But as it starts to get lower, 60%, things like your heater rear window and your fan and everything is switched off. Now we've got a nice little function on the Autologic that we can go into to try and ascertain what the state of charge is. So if we connect our Autologic and we go into service functions on the main screen, and if we then go into battery charge status, we'll see a little report of the current state of charge and the state of charge up to 5 days ago. Now it literally does depend on where that is. It depends on what is or is not going to work. Now, before we do any other work, if we're going to be looking into why the battery's gone flat for the customer, we're going to have to fully charge the battery first. Any sort of battery diagnosis done on a low battery state of charge it is going to give us false readings. So basically, before we do any further diagnosis on the car, let's fully charge the battery first, guys. A test we can run, though, just to try and ascertain what is going on, is a function called energy diagnosis. Now, this function can be called up by going into service functions and then clicking energy diagnosis. What this will do is the engine ECU is the power management, and during the car's rest state, the RBS sensor transmits various bits of information over a set period of time back to the engine ECU. Now, we can look at this report and we can try and see what's going on inside the car. We can, if we're lucky, catch a standby current draw if it's a parasitic drain that's caused the issue. Now, we can store up to the last 32 cycles of information, and we can read that out. Now, a cycle, I've often been asked, what is a cycle? So a cycle is a period of time that the car has been asleep for. Now, in normal everyday driving, without the sort of COVID-19 situation, a customer may get into their car, they drive to work, they turn the car off, it goes to sleep for 6-7 hours, they come home, they turn it off, it goes to sleep for another sort of 8 or 9 hours. Potentially there's 2 sleep cycles in a day. So if you have a 32 cycle piece of information, that's potentially sort of 16 days worth of information there. However, cars now, they may or may not have been moved for a while. So this sleep cycle thing to look at may not be as useful information, but if there is a drain in there, the IBS sensor has picked up a drain, it will display it, and it will list it in various ways. So you get most of these BMW cars and modern cars now, they're allowed to have an 80 milliamp drain. So the display will say 0 to 80 milliamps, and ideally you'll see all of them like that and there won't be an issue. However, you can then have 80 to 200 milliamps. That is too much, and it should give you an amount of time it's been in that drain path for, and then it goes up and up to over an amp. We can also look at battery information on it. We can see the original battery type that's been fitted, or what the battery has been registered to the car currently. Again, we can look at more state of charge information as we go along. The state of charge is also read out in this energy diagnosis report. Driving profile and mobilisation period, guys. Yeah, we might have to ignore that one at the moment. It's useful information potentially if it was a normal situation and the customer's complaining his battery's going flat all the time. You can look at his sort of the profile of how he uses the car. But at the moment, when they're sort of sat still, then they're not really going to be much use to us. Other bits of information in the report, chaps, is the I can't get my words out now. It has a frequent wake up list and also a controlling that prevented sleep. So energy diagnosis isn't the be all and end all to diagnosing a battery, but it can point us to an area. So the IBS sensor will tell us if it's got a drain. It won't tell us where, but you can see how many times a drain has been active, and the sleep preventer can let you know that maybe a control unit or something connected to a control unit like CAS or footwear module has prevented it from going to sleep. Or it may list the footwear module or the CAS or the cluster or something as something that's woken it up more frequently. So we're just narrowing down the areas of where we need to go for our diagnosis. Battery drain testing, guys. So we've done energy diagnosis on an F. I should go back actually. Let me just go back to the previous slide. Apologies. For F series cars and minis, so the R5X mini series, the report isn't viewable on the tool. But if you send us a vehicle report for a mini or a vehicle scan for an F series car, we can run that report here at Autologic, and then we can email it to you and we can discuss the results. So, as we've just discussed, the energy diagnosis report is quite a quick thing to carry out, and it can give us some valuable information, but it isn't the be all and end all. Ultimately, we're going to have to do some battery drain testing. So there are various ways that we can confirm that the car is asleep. As you can see from the screen, we can look at things like start-stop illumination, the window switch, isolation switch. If you press it, the little green LED comes up on the switch to stop the kids playing from the windows in the back. We can look at vanity lights. We can look at gear lever illumination if it's not a GWS. But ultimately, one thing to remember on E-Series cars, guys, if you give yourself an hour, the car should be fully asleep. And then we know exactly what we're going to test and what we're looking for in terms of current draw, which again should be maximum 80 milliamps. F-Series guys, we can look at the start-stop button illumination. Map lights, they go to sleep sort of after 8 minutes unlocked. If they're deadlocked, they will go straight away. There's some fuses in the back that we can check, but ultimately, if you remember on an F series car, gentlemen, 12 minutes the car will be asleep for, and again, you're looking at a maximum of 80 milliamps. Remember again though, fully charge the battery before we do any of this testing. G-series is a little bit different. Now, hopefully you won't get too many G-series with a battery drain, but I wanted to put this in here because it's kind of changed and it shuts down a lot quicker. So yes, we can use the start-stop button, and that goes out now very, very quickly, sort of 13 to 45 seconds. Illumination around the light switch, and generally everything else seems to shut down after about. So these cars now will go to sleep in a total of 6 minutes, 30 seconds to 7 minutes, and they do tend to have a very low sort of standard. We tested a sort of fully kitted out one, and that had a 20 milliamp resting current draw. But again, the maximum on these guys is 80. But I just want to let you know that if you do have to do a G-Series car, the shutdown periods are a lot quicker. They've really improved. You can still use a few of the interior lights to check, but ultimately the hazard light switch is the last one to go out. And when that is out, the car is totally asleep. So maximum of 7 minutes on there, guys. Another thing we can do on the slightly older cars to try and pinpoint an area. So this is predominantly the BMW E60 series, so E60, E61, or the 6 Series E63 and E64. We have a function on the Autologic called Bus Sleep Troubleshooting Guide. Now this is done with the unit in demo mode. So car set up for a battery drain. Ideally, you're probably going to want the glove box removed on this one, but doors open, catches rolled. Place the Autologic into demo mode, and then you can go in manually, select 5 Series. Select E60, select body, bus functions, and then bus sleep troubleshooting. And it's a series of questions. So you probably can't really see that on there, but the first question it asks is, forgive me for looking to the side, but I do have my trusty Assist Plus here helping me out with these slides. The first question it's going to ask is the vehicle newer than September 2005? And you just answer these questions honestly. If you click yes, it will give you a certain thing to look for it to go to sleep. If you click no, then it will take you another way. And basically, it's getting you to check the car after certain periods of sleep activity. Answer the questions honestly, and you'll be led to an area that we need to look at on the car. Ultimately, this test does end up with you asking you to remove some of the CAN lines out of the gateway module. When you get to that point, give us a shout, guys, unless you've got wiring diagrams yourself, but just give us a shout and we can tell you which wires to move. But the idea of this particular test module is it tries to narrow down again an area of the car. So some of the questions sort of later on will say, right, remove the 2K CAN lines out of the gateway module. Did the car go to sleep, or did the drain reduce? And then basically that's if it does, then we know that we're looking at something connected on the K-CAN circuit, which unfortunately does involve another bit of diagnosis because the K-CAN's quite big and there's various things connected to it. But if it stays at a slightly high current draw, you can then go to the next question, which is take the PT CAN lines out. You take that out. Does the drain reduce? Does the current draw reduce? If the answer is yes, then we know that we're looking at something on the connected on the PT CAN, which is a little bit better because then it's sort of 4 or 5 control units potentially connected on that. Ultimately, though, nothing is going to be better for you for testing other than conventional battery drain testing. All the before mentioned thing, any diagnosis, bus sleep troubleshooting, they're all aids. They give us valuable information, but we're ultimately going to we'll have to go into battery drain testing. So looking at the two pictures, again, forgive me if I'm sort of telling something that you already know, but you can connect your multimeter up in series with the earth, and you'll be looking at the current draw present. Personally, used to do it with an amp clamp. Amp clamp was connected up to the dealer tool that I had, the iMib, but you can get perfectly good amp clamps that are just standalone units connected to a scope. Key thing to do those is zero them before you put it round, and then and constantly keep re-zeroing the amp clamp because they can just go out of calibration the longer that you're using them. But amp clamps I've always find a good bit of kit because you can actually move them around the car and you can go to power distribution points, connect around cables. We can try and work out an area, whether it's front or back. You can then isolate wires going into control. They're a really, really good bit of kit. A couple of you, I know that you've used this because you sort of mentioned it to me in cases that we've dealt with, and also on some of the sort of Facebook groups that I'm on, is that people now are using thermal imaging cameras because if you've got a large battery drain, putting out some amps, something's going to be warm, and it's a really good bit of kit to try and isolate an area of the car. Never used one myself, but I have seen sort of videos of people using them and certain pictures of results and that's another good bit of kit you can use, guys. Anyway, so we've gone through battery sort of diagnosis, looking at battery state of charge. We've gone to look at battery drain testing, energy diagnosis, equipment that we can use to try and locate the drain after a repair, or after even the fact that the battery is just sold. There is a possibility we're just simply going to have to replace the battery. So what we would need to do, guys, is after we replace the battery, and I know, forgive me for the basicness of this next statement, but we need to make sure that we just tighten up the IBS sensor correctly. They're so very sensitive. The specified torque is 5 Newton meters. Now, that's not even a flick of the wrist. And most of us guys that have been doing sort of working on cars for quite a long time, we get strong wrists, strong forearms. You can very easily over tighten without realizing it. IBS sensor then doesn't read properly, and you're ended up with sort of battery warning lights on the cluster when there's nothing wrong other than the fact the IBS sensor has been over tightened. So after we put the battery in correctly, after we've tightened up the IBS sensor, we really want to register the battery change. Now, the important thing about registering the battery change is that with the cars with power management, you can't do it with cars pre-power management. There is no intelligent charging. But cars with power management, we need to register the battery change, and it is done via going into service functions and entering battery, registering the battery change. On an F-Series car, it is slightly different. You go into the engine ECU, battery management, and register the battery change. The reason why we do this is because the engine ECU, the power management system, will adapt to charging an older battery. So it has to work a lot harder to keep that battery charged sufficiently. We put a nice new battery in it. If we don't tell the power management system that we've done that, that will keep charging that new battery too hard, and it'll ultimately damage the battery. So it is really important to register the battery change, fellas. So F-Series registration is slightly different. So you go into your engine ECU, and then there is a button that says battery management. And then in the battery management, there's some other information. It'll tell you the battery that's registered to the car at the moment. But there's a little arrow, if you can see there, it will say register battery change. And we click that, and we can enter the battery. Now, ideally, we're going to be registering the battery of the same capacity. So because that's basically the one that we took off, we're going to put back the exact same one, or the one that the car left the factory with, we're going to put the same one back in. It's a lot easier to do that. Now, the customer may say, actually, I want a bigger battery. So if we want to register a battery of a bigger capacity, then we need to go into retrofits first before we can register the battery. So on the E89X models, so that's your 1s and your 3s, your 5 and your 6 series, you go into CIP, making sure it's up to date, of course. Then we go into retrofits and conversions. Retrofitting a bigger battery, so we click the battery change and the arrow next to the battery, and then it will give you an option of different sizes to fit. Now, you can only fit there is a certain selection, and if the battery that you've got isn't from BMW, it's from another source, and it's of a size that isn't quite there, just pick the closest one to it, is my advice. But ideally, we want to go for genuine batteries. F-Series cars is slightly different. We don't have to go straight into CRP. We just go into retrofits. Same thing again, battery change, and you can select. And this here, we've got a screenshot there of the different sizes. So you can anything from, you've got 70, 80, 90, and you can also change it from an AGM to a lead acid battery and vice versa. But the key thing is if you're doing any changes to the battery, changing the type or changing the size, we need to retrofit it first. So once we've retrofitted it, we can go back in to the battery registration function, and you click register battery same capacity. Now, a couple of things that we see quite often after a battery change has taken place, especially maybe on the older cars like the E60s or the E90s, that we get a fault code afterwards for the safety battery terminal. Now, this quite often happens because I don't know if you can see in your picture, but we've got there's the little black there's a photo of the little black clip in the middle here with the red arrows on it. Now that is this sort of a generic airbag connector, but what happens is the little plastic legs get broken off, either just purely by removing that the terminal off of the airbag connector, or sometimes I do know this because unfortunately I have done it myself, is when you lift the battery positive terminal off the battery, if you don't take that terminal off, you just try and fold it out of the way, you could put a little bit too much pressure on that clip. The lugs break, and basically inside where the airbag connector pushes onto the explosive device on the SBK lead, there are two little metal tags. Now, if those plastic clips are broken, those metal tags come down, and it's basically a short circuit protector, and it causes a fault. Ultimately, the fix is you can actually get a repair kit for the airbag loom, and you can get a new sort of clip section, and we need to replace that clip section. It's really, really common. You may or may not have come across it, guys, but working for Autologic, I have seen this sort of quite a few times. An SBK fault after replacing the battery, and this little plastic clip has broken. The image on the right, you can see the grey image. That's what it should look like with all those, those four sort of long legs. And quite often we see they're like the image in the middle where the little plastic legs are broken off. So something to be aware of there, chaps. Now, many of you may have come across this. The FRM failure after replacing a battery. It's kind of unavoidable, unfortunately. It is a known issue, but you can, by doing something as innocent as replacing a battery, even down to plugging in a diagnostic machine into the OBD socket, you can actually, without even realizing it, cause a failure for the FRM. Symptoms can be after you've put the battery back on, or after you've carried out your diagnosis that the windows are no longer working, the interior lights aren't working, you've got no control over the exterior lights, and then when you go in again diagnostically, you go and look for communications issues, and the FRM has failed to communicate. Now, again, this isn't, you haven't caused this yourself. There's nothing you've done wrong. It unfortunately is a known issue with the footwheel module. The fix that I would advise, if you contact Autologic about it, is to replace the footwheel module. But I do know there are people out there that can actually repair these. They sort of open up the casing, and they have special equipment that repairs the EEPROM inside. But it's just something to be aware of, that especially now when there may be a lot of battery replacements going on, or batteries have gone flat, and we've managed to recharge and put some voltage supply back into the system. These footwheel modules do tend to fail, and I should imagine there'll be quite a few cases that you're going to see where customers are now saying my windows are not working, or you discover that after a battery replacement. Then we get on to the EWS tampering. So on some of the older cars, we do tend to see that if the battery went flat and we corrected the power supply, we put a battery charger back on it, or we replaced the battery, the engine ECU and the car access system controlling it has lost its handshake. So there are a few things that we can do to try and get this back. Some of you may have done this before, but bear with me, I'm just going to go through it, because this is another case that we get through a lot of calls about. So the key thing we can do here is, guys, even if you've just put a new battery on it, is before we can carry out the EWS tampering, sort of reset the CAS DME alignments, we need to have a battery charger connected, guys, ideally on the same sort of setting that we do when we're programming. So 14.6 volts, good solid supply going into the terminals, and then we're in a good position to go forward to the service functions. So diesel variants, it's a little bit easier. You can go into service functions, and you can go into the engine ECU and carry out a function called the DDE CAS matching. Once you've gone in to that particular module, there are two options to choose from, and it is the second option that we need to choose, gentlemen, which is the start value matching reset. The top one is there if we have to replace the engine ECU, but we haven't done that, so we're just going to reset the start value. Now, there are actually, I'm just going to go back a page, there are actually a couple of places you can find this. Now, depending on the engine ECU variant, it's going to be a standalone button. So when you go into engine ECU, and it will see diagnostic request, service functions, test functions, etc., there may be a standalone button that says DDE CAS matching. More often than not, it is actually within either the service functions button or the test functions button, but it is literally variant dependent. Petrol versions, we do can have to go into CAS sometimes. So we go into drive, go into CAS service functions, and we click the CAS DME alignment. Now, some of the older ones, this alignment will work perfectly. Some of the new ones, it won't. And if you're in doubt, there's a list down the bottom that you can click the arrow against the model of the car, and it will let you know whether this alignment can actually take place. once you've done the alignment in the CAS, you will then, depending again on the ECU variant or the engine type, you still have to do the CAS matching in the engine ECU. So you go into drive, you go into engine ECU, you go into service function, and it will say DDE EWS adjustment, but it's the same thing as a diesel matching one. When you go into it, select option 2, rewrite the start value. All being well, the EWS tampering code should clear and the car will start. Now, what happens when this fault code doesn't clear and the DME and the DD CAS does not realign? Now, there is a possibility that it won't work first time round. So the advice for this is to do this a couple of times. Sometimes you can do it 3 or 4 times, and the 4th time it works quite well. Sometimes it still doesn't realign, so we let the car go to sleep. If you can, don't just let the bus network go to sleep, for the sort of 3 minutes, the start stop button light to go out. Give it half an hour, 40 minutes, go back and try again. We have had success with that. We've also had success with doing a battery reset and doing it again. The battery reset does have its own issues, as explained earlier about the footwell module, but it's something we might have to do. Moving forward, though, if that still doesn't allow the DD and the CAS to realign, the next step is if you have a slightly older version, give us a call, because we can look at the wiring diagram, chassis specific. Some of the older versions have a separate DDE EWS line, which is a line specifically for transmitting the codes between the two. Now we can get you to check that line, the integrity of the line, make sure the pins aren't corroded. We can guide you through scoping the CAS, and we can give you some reference signals of what the CAS signal should look like if it's sending out the right information. And we can, depending on what we see, depending on where we need to go. Some of the newer cars, though, this is done via CAN. So if you have one of those cars where the information is transmitted via CAN and not via a separate line, what you will need to do is update the engine ECU and the CAS, because that should make them realign themselves together. The downside to that is we do put the CAS control in it on hold. So if you've ever requested a CAS programming file, you would have got an email saying, please contact Autologic. And the reason why we do that is that CAS can fall over when updated, but in this situation, the car doesn't start. We kind of don't have a choice, so we will release the file to you, but it is still a possibility. Now, quite often you program the CAS, you program the engine ECU, the alignment does take place, and the car can start. We have had a few occasions with minis, and for some reason, the Mini doesn't like to do it even after updating it. At that point in time, and I have had this conversation with many customers, and I've seen it. Never really had it so much at the dealers. More of the cars have got a bit older, and they're in sort of going through to the independents on your network. But your choice then is we're going to have to look at replacing one or the other. Unfortunately, you can't interpret the CAN message whether the CAS is sending it and the ECU isn't understanding it, or if the CAS isn't sending it at all. So we advise on this occasion to go into the to go and replace the CAS, because it's the cheapest control net to do out of the two. You can't borrow one from another car, because the engine ECU and the CAS and the key all have to be matched. So if you borrow them as kit, you're not proving anything, unfortunately. So it is a logical step, unfortunately, is to replace the CAS, because it is cheaper. The downside to CAS on a Mini is it's buried under the dash. It's not the easiest one to get to. That is pretty rare, and in my experience, I've only ever had to do that on the Minis. I've never actually had to replace control units on a BMW for this tampering fault. Now, another little tip that some of you may or may not be aware of, and I know in the area that I live in, there we have a lot of the E70, E71, because school-run mums, they do tend to like these cars, Chelsea tractors, as we call them. They're stop-start journeys, and the battery goes flat quite quickly anyway, let alone now when the cars aren't being used very much. But what you can do is a function called the short driver profile. Now, it's only for E70 and E71s, but what this function does is reduces the shutdown time from 40 minutes down to 20 minutes. So it's designed to basically reduce the load on the battery and to try and make sure the battery doesn't go flat as quick. And it is quite a useful function, especially there's a lot of these cars around, and I bet a lot of them haven't had this done. So go into CIP, go into retrofits and conversions, go into encoding package short distance profile, which is basically the short driver profile. Click the right arrow, and then ultimately you can retrofit this function to the car. The only time you can't do it is if the car has auxiliary heating. So when you get this far, just have a quick double, give us a call, or if you've got access to BMW's AOS system or any way you can check the vehicle order, just check and make sure you don't have option code 536 fitted auxiliary heating. If you don't, then you're safe to retrofit this short distance profile, and basically that will encode the car to shut down a lot quicker, and it's ideal for these bigger cars that there's a lot of car there, and there's a lot of electrics going on inside, and basically the batteries do tend to go flat if it doesn't have this profile fitted. Another possible fault that you could be presented with, and this is not necessarily down to a flat battery, this can sort of spring up at any time, but we have had a few cases over the last few days, actually, people phoning up saying that the car's been stood now for a few weeks. Now they've got an ELV fault, ignition's not coming on, only the terminal R is available, so the initial position, so the handbrake light and the airbag light's coming on, and we have an amber or red message in the cluster, and we have possible codes inside the CAS of, as you can see down the bottom, A111, A112, etc., and they are critical status of ELV faults. Now, something we can do, and then what I would advise to do to start with, before we get too carried away in sort of going into diagnosing of the steering column, is just so we can make the car a little bit more usable, maybe to get it off the drive into your workshop, or get it from the car park into your garage, is to connect to the AutoLogic first. You can identify the vehicle and go into the car access system, go into service functions, carry out the ELV fault counter reset. Do that first, because it could just be that is enough to reset the fault counter cache, bring the ignition back on, bring it in, and then we can do some diagnosis. Now, if unfortunately you do have the situation where that cache reset doesn't work, there are a couple of things we can do. Now, what we used to do at the dealer, and I know this is a little bit easier at the dealer when we had a car park full of donor vehicles, but you never know. Some of you guys may have some similar cars lying around. But we used to make up a fly lead. So as you can see here, this is the kit number. Anyone wants this information, we can give it to them afterwards. But this kit number is basically an airbag repair loom with 4 pins at each end, and with the correct adapters, we can make up a fly lead. And the idea behind this is you can connect the CAS control in it from the car that is faulting to the steering column of a car that isn't faulting, to enable the ignition to come on. That way, we can. All we're doing is proving that it's the steering column that is the problem before we go down another path of diagnosis. It was a good bit of sort of trickery, and it was actually it was quite useful. Other things you can do that are available, which weren't available during my time, are emulators. I was made aware of this by a customer of AutoLogic. He said, I use an emulator now. So I did a little bit of research, and they're all over the internet, emulators, but they're a great bit of kit. Again, you just unplug the steering column, the plug from the steering column lock, plug the emulator in, do your ELV full counter reset. If it all comes back to life, we've physically 100% proved it's the ELV column, the steering lock on the column that's the fault. Another thing you could do, which another customer said to me that he's done, which is another good idea, he had a known good working motor, and he's just kept it for diagnostic purposes and plugged it in. Anything that you do after any diagnostic step, always reset the ELV fault counter. Now, there is a little bit of a misconception out there that programming CAS is the fix for this. So I'd like to say that it's not, and I'm sort of going to stick to that opinion, contrary to what other people have sort of said to me. In yesteryear, when we were at the dealer, we did used to update CAS for the steering column faults, but all it did was increase the internal fault counter limit that the CAS could handle a problem with the steering lock. In layman's terms, you might find that the internal fault counter was set to 50, and by programming it, you tripled it. That's what they told us. So we didn't know the actual sort of figure. I'm giving you a figure. It's for demonstration purposes. So instead of 50, it went to 150. But the fix, we were always putting the new steering columns on. Yes, we would program them afterwards, but it was increasing the fault tolerance in case it happened again. But ultimately, it's not the fix. And given how fragile CAS is, we would strongly advise programming against CAS. Some of you have had success programming in CAS, I know. Some of you haven't. But yeah, for me, I would just be fitting the new steering column lock. Now, there are other possible symptoms that you might find, and that is where the similar situation, steering lock is stuck on, but a total loss of ignition now. So we don't, you still only got terminal R present, but we don't have any steering lock faults. But you go in to the CAS diagnostic request and look at terminals, and all your terminal 15s are down at 0. So something is dragging down the terminal 15. So there are many possible causes for this. I'm just going to go through a few common ones with you now that may you can quickly sort of gain access to and do some diagnosis just to try and see why we have a loss of ignition not caused by the steering lock. So possible causes that we are aware of, guys. We know, and some of you may have been aware of this, but the IBS sensor. So cars with power management system, the IBS sensor does some wonderful things for us. However, it can also cause the terminal 15 to drag down. So the first thing I would do if the car does have an IBS sensor is just quickly go around the back, unplug the IBS sensor. Does the ignition come back on? You may have to go into CAS, do a CAS reset and a fault counter reset just as a matter of course. But ultimately, we do this a lot where the IBS sensors drag down the terminal 15. The reason for that is it is connected to the terminal 15 wake up, and when it has a failure on the inside, it brings down the whole network. Another possibility is if the car has comfort access, so the remote entry, sometimes identifiable by the little ribs on the outer door handle, definitely identifiable by if you checking on the vehicle order and see if it has option code 322, which is comfort access. If it does have comfort access, it is very possible that the outer door handle has caused the failure. Now, the outer door handle communicates information via a system called the bus PA. The bus PA is what the steering column lock transmits information to the CAS on as well. So if the outer door handles are dragged down that bus network, unfortunately, it takes down the steering column. If the steering column doesn't transmit the right information, the ignition won't come on. A very quick test for this, guys, is to gain access to the control unit on the older cars, be in the back of the car, unplug it. The ignition should spring back to life. If the ignition springs back to life, we know it's one of the door handles. So what you can do then is maybe reconnect the module and then go and test the doors one at a time. Easiest thing to do is open the doors and just disconnect the main A-pillar connector. If you do the driver's door and it springs back to life, we'll be looking at a driver's door handle. Same thing with the passenger door. Some of the more sort of highly spec cars, most of the time your Throns and 3s, they tend to only have the front doors, so you only got 2 handles to worry about. Some of the more sort of highly spec cars then can go onto the rear handles as well. Now, there is a possibility that you have comfort access or you don't have comfort access and terminal 15 is still down. The next thing we would advise you to do is go to the car access system control unit. A little bit easier if it's on a BMW or not a Mini, but take out pin 19 from the plug. So there are 2 plug connectors on the CAS control unit. You've got a ribbon cable, which is just information from the start-stop button. And you've got the main sort of multi-plug. If you unlatch that multi-plug, separate and remove the outer casing. If we locate pin 19 in the housing, if we remove pin 19 and sort of fold it back out the way, refit the plug, refit it to CAS, the ignition sometimes can spring back on its own, or after we've done a CAS reset, the ignition springs back on its own. If that's the case, there is something connected to the terminal 15 wake-up circuit dragging it down, and that could be anything from fuel pump control on it, engine ECU, DSC, DME, DDE, power steering rack. Just give us a call, and we will email you over a link to the diagram, or we can tell you which control and what which is connected to the terminal 15 wake-up, and then it'll be just a methodical process. Pin 19 back into the plug, going around disconnecting one of the other control units one at a time until the ignition comes back to life. There is a possibility it's CAS, but it's very, very rare. In my experience, I don't think I've ever replaced CAS for a terminal 15 wake-up problem. It's always been a component connected to it. That is it, guys, in terms of me talking about symptoms. Now, there are obviously maybe many other problems that you could experience, but these are the most common ones that we have. Ones that we do see a lot of on a daily basis coming into the Autologic call log, and ones that we're speaking about a lot. So I really hope it wasn't too basic. I hope you have picked up a little something from it. I definitely enjoy talking to you, and I know from a personal point of view and a professional point of view, I really strongly hope that each and every single one of you are well, your families are well, and your businesses are going to come through this the other side. We want to see you again after the COVID-19 situation is over. I know for one, I'm very grateful to be able to work from home, very grateful, but I'm getting a little bit stir crazy. I just need some normality to return. Please do not hesitate to contact us if we can help you and your workshop. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you for watching. And your questions, I will do my very best to answer them. I think we could hopefully going to do a Q&A sort of sheet and get them published afterwards. But thank you very much for watching me. Thank you. I have been asked to do some questions now, so apologies if I've just turned that camera off and I'm back on again. I'm just trying to see any questions that you've got. So, guys, if you do have any questions, post some questions on the chat. I'm looking at the chat now. If you're still there, and I will try to answer them as best I can. Nicola, if you're listening, I actually can't see any questions. Can you give me a bit of guidance to where the questions are? Yes, so I can see a question here from Joyce Sanders. Will this webinar be available? Yes, the webinar I believe will be available to view on the Autologic website, and I'm pretty sure they might even be going out on YouTube at some point. A few people have asked, can we watch this again? The answer will be yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. We can watch this again. You will be able to watch this again. It's going to be put up on the Autologic website after this. FRM best practice to advise us beforehand. Hi, Steve. Steve SDN. FRM failure. Yeah, so best practice are definitely warn the customer. Unfortunately, it is a huge problem, and it's definitely worth your while just advising the customer, even if you've got to do a battery disconnection for energy, some engine work for whatever reason. Just warn the customer it can happen. And to be fair, the information that we know about it is it can even fail from being plugged into to a diagnostic machine. So yeah, definitely. Whether it's worth having a little sort of laminated sign up in your service reception, giving your service advisors a little nudge, just advise people that footwell module is a possibility, and it's definitely not your fault, guys. There's nothing you can do. It's just an unfortunate sort of unreliable piece of technology or unreliable control unit, unfortunately. Yes, in terms of what can you do to eliminate a run flow? I mean, starting the car for 15 minutes every day, personally, I wouldn't do that. Because if you're not driving the car and putting any load underneath it, you're not really going to. We're not really going to do any good to the car. I mean, if you can and you're allowed to, just go when you go and do your shopping, just drive your car a little bit longer, or potentially purchase yourself a little trickle charge or something like that, and just leave that connected. That's what I would do. Part numbers for the bypass wiring kit you said for, yes, we can give you those. That won't be a problem. I'm sure if you drop an email into us or send just a log into the CRM, I can email you them over. That won't be a problem. Maybe if I could speak to Nicola afterwards, we can maybe publish that with a Q&A afterwards as well. That's for Russell. Yes, I'm definitely sure we can give you the part numbers for that wiring for the bypass gate. That won't be a problem. Mike Bennett, sorry this sounds dumb, but what is the IBS short for? I think what I meant for IBS, what is it short for? I get you now. So IBS is short for Intelligent Battery Sensor. Yeah, so it's a little piece of electronics that's located on the negative terminal, and the basically it stands for Intelligent Battery Sensor. It's how the electronics inside monitors battery temperature, current, and voltage over time, and sends it information back to the power management system. So yes, Intelligent Battery Sensor. Not a dumb question. I've been working with BMWs for probably too long, and you get so used to the names and what the abbreviations are. I just come out and say it. So yeah, apologies. I should have said that first. But yeah, IBS sensor is Intelligent Battery Sensor. Alan Simpson, is there a way of saving these later to a file? That's a good question. I mean, I think they're always going to be available on our website. So whether you can then download it from the website or not, I'm not too sure. I will have to liaise with Nicola for that one, and I'm hoping that all of these questions will be sort of documented and answers published to them sort of later on. But I will find out on that one for you, Alan. I'll write that one down now, actually. Save for later. Luis Fraga, forgive the pronunciation. Hi, Luis. Yes, the information presentation, the presentation will be available to view again on the Autologic website. So when you sign in, you will be able to see these again. Yeah, don't worry that they're not just sort of limited to the time that we present them for. That they will be available on our website, for future reference. Yeah, I think even my colleague Nicola has provided a link to that. So yes, all of the webinars, you can watch them again. You just go onto the autologic.com training and then webinar. Hi, Mohammed. Hi. I don't think we're going to be putting this in a PDF, but as like my sort of colleague sort of put out there, they are available to watch time and time again. Just go onto the website and yeah, you can click on the link and you can watch it all again. Hi Zane. Yeah, after the replacement, are the replacement FRMs less likely to fail? I believe they are. I think the replacement ones are a lot stronger, and they're less likely to fail. And it doesn't happen to all of them. It tends to be sort of the older sort of FRM 2.3s. I mean, it does affect a lot of cars. So you 1 Series, E87, E90s, X5s. I don't think I've ever seen one on an E89 Z4 person, but that might be. But I think it's possible. But as the cars get newer, sort of 2011, 2012, they don't seem to do that. And yes, the replacement ones that you get from BMW, I think they're a little bit more robust. So yeah, the replacement FRMs are less likely to fail. So they can be repaired though. I know that there are people that do this. I did have a chat with one of our a customer when I went to Dubai, and he showed me what he did in his workshop. Showed me some pictures, and yeah, as long as you've got the right equipment, they can be repaired. But my dealer trained I am, unfortunately, so I've never repaired them like that. But yeah, I mean, but replacement ones, yes, they are less likely to fail, in my opinion. Hi Dale, what models were prone to the FRM failure again? So models affected are the E871 series, the E9X3 series, so that's whether it's E90, E91, E92, E93, the E70X5s, minis, so the R5X minis, up to a sort of age really of about sort of 2011, 2012. They don't seem to do it so much on those models when they were just before they were replaced by the new F series. They seem to, the later ones seem to be a little bit more sort of better. But definitely the older ones, FRM 2, 3 variant in the ones, threes, X5s, predominantly minis. Yeah, that's they're the most common models. Can you type here what damage may be? Hi Russell, is there a document explaining the models and pins to disconnect, etc., to get them disconnecting, start to disconnect the door? I mean, we probably could put a little something together. We haven't done a sort of a generic document for this yet, but I'm sure it's something that we can put together as a help file. As a rule, IBS sensor first, because it's one of the easiest ones to get to. Failing that, yeah, pin 19 at CAS, just remember that. But if not, just give us a shout. We'll email you over everything anyway. But yeah, it's something we haven't put a document together yet, but I'll put that down in my little book here as a reminder, because we're always constantly sort of writing documents anyway. But yeah, it's something that I'm sure at some point we can put together a document. The comfort access one is a good one, as we don't have comfort access so much, it doesn't seem, over here in the UK, but we do seem to have it a lot across Europe. And I don't know how many times recently I've got, with the case come in with it, we haven't got ignition, they've done X, Y, and Z, and the car has comfort access. You go to it, disconnect the control, and everything comes back to life. So yeah, if you do see that the car has comfort access, most of the time identified by the little ridges on the door handle, yeah, just, I mean, give us a call or look up the wiring, disconnect the control in it, and then it's a question of if the ignition comes back, just put it back as it was and just disconnect one of the. If you open up the doors, you've got the main A pillar connectors. If you disconnect those main A pillar connector harnesses, the harness connector, if it comes back to life, yeah, it's going to be a door handle. But yes, it's just a good question, and given the time, I think probably when we're back up to sort of full staff, we'll look at we'll look at putting a document together for that. Right, guys, that is me done. Got to get back on the call log now. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your questions, and look after yourselves. And we'll speak to each other soon. Take care. Bye bye.